Karma isn't always a distant, mystical force. Sometimes it arrives with the ruthless precision of a corporate takeover. This is the story of how one flight attendant's casual insult telling a black passenger, "This cabin isn't for people like you," ignited a Wall Street firestorm. She had no idea her target was Marcus Thorne, a quiet billionaire who decided the only acceptable apology was to buy the entire airline. He didn't just want her job, he wanted her CEO's chair. This isn't just a story of revenge. It's a masterclass in how to dismantle an empire of disrespect, one share at a time. The air in the Global Air Alliance first-class lounge at JFK was a carefully curated illusion of tranquility. It smelled of expensive leather espresso and the faint citrusy perfume of the complimentary hot towels. For most, it was an oasis from the chaotic symphony of the main terminal. For Marcus Thorne, it was just a place to wait. He was a man who had mastered the art of waiting for markets to turn, for deals to close, for the right moment to act. Dressed in a simple unbranded grey tracksuit and wearing a pair of high-end noise-cancelling headphones, he looked less like a titan of industry and more like an athlete on his day off. This anonymity was a luxury he cherished. He wasn't Marcus Thorne, founder of the multi-billion-dollar private equity firm Thorne Capital, the man who had reshaped the logistics and aerospace sectors. Here he was just a tired traveler, nursing a bottle of water and scrolling through architectural plans for a new community centre on his tablet. The trip to London was the final piece of a puzzle, a face-to-face meeting to close a deal that would be the largest of his career. He was exhausted, but a deep, quiet hum of satisfaction ran beneath the surface. The first crack in the calm appeared at the boarding gate. The agent, a woman with a name tag that read Cynthia and a severely tight blonde bun, scanned his ticket. Her eyes flicked from the paper to his face, then to his tracksuit and back again. A flicker of something disdain, suspicion crossed her features before being replaced by a professionally strained smile. "First class, sir," she asked, her tone implying the question was a test. "That's what the ticket says," Marcus replied evenly, not bothering to remove his headphones. She tapped her acrylic nails on the counter. "May I see your ID, please?" It was a standard request, but her tone made it feel like an interrogation. The white businessman in a tailored suit ahead of him had breezed through with a jolly cheers and no such scrutiny. Marcus produced his passport. Cynthia held it a moment too long, her eyes comparing the powerful, smiling man in the photo to the weary one in the tracksuit standing before her. "All right, you can proceed. Gate 7A. Enjoy your flight with Global Air Alliance," she said, the corporate slogan sounding more like a warning than a wish. Marcus walked down the jet bridge, the slight friction with Cynthia already fading into the background noise of a long travel day. He had faced far worse. He was the son of a mechanic and a school teacher from Queens. He had built his empire on a foundation of being underestimated. This was nothing. He found his seat 1A, a spacious pod at the very front of the cabin, with its own minibar and a privacy screen. He stowed his carry-on, a well-worn leather duffel bag, in the overhead compartment and settled into the plush, buttery seat. He was about to put his headphones back on when a voice, sharp and laced with an unctuous sweetness, cut through the cabin's quiet hum. "Excuse me. Sir, can I help you?" He looked up. A flight attendant with perfectly coiffed, bottle-blonde hair and a name tag reading Lorraine stood over him. She was the purser, the lead attendant, and she wore her authority like a military decoration. Beside her stood a younger male attendant. Todd, who watched his superior with a nervous, eager-to-please expression. "I'm fine, thank you, Marcus," said his voice calm. Lorraine's smile didn't reach her cold blue eyes. "I think you might be in the wrong cabin. Economy is further down the back of the aircraft." The statement hung in the air, thick and suffocating. A few other passengers in the nearby seats glanced over, their curiosity piqued. Marcus felt a familiar hot spike of anger, but he banked it down. Decades of boardroom negotiations had taught him that the coolest head always wins. "My ticket is for seat 1A, he stated simply, holding up the boarding pass from his pocket. Lorraine barely glanced at it. Her eyes did another slow, deliberate sweep of his attire. "It's just that we do have a certain standard in this cabin. It seems there's been a mistake." Todd, her junior, chimed in. "Sometimes the system glitches. We can find your actual seat for you." The word actual was dripping with insinuation. Marcus took a slow breath. He could see the narrative they were building in their minds, the one they had probably built 100 times before. The man who didn't look the part, the person who didn't belong. He decided to meet them head-on, but with professional detachment. "There is no mistake. My name is Marcus Thorne. The ticket was purchased for me by my company. The seat is 1A. Please scan the pass if you're concerned." Lorraine's smile vanished completely, replaced by a mask of brittle annoyance. She took the boarding pass and scanned it with a device from her pocket. The machine beeped affirmatively. For a moment, she was silent, her mind clearly struggling to reconcile the data on the screen with the man in front of her. But prejudice is a stubborn fortress not easily breached by facts. She handed the ticket back, her fingers pinching it as if it were contaminated. And then she said the words that would echo in his mind for the next 8 hours across the Atlantic. The words that would alter the course of her life, Todd's life, and the very structure of the airline that employed them. "Well, that's surprising," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, yet loud enough for the surrounding passengers to hear clearly. "Just so you know, even if you have a ticket, this cabin isn't really for people like you. We ask our first-class passengers to respect a certain dress code, for the comfort of others. People like you." The phrase landed like a physical blow. It was an old, ugly ghost, a phrase that had haunted generations. It was designed to diminish, to exclude, to wound. And it did. In that moment, he wasn't a billionaire. He was a black man in a tracksuit being told he was unworthy of the seat he had paid for. The passengers who had been pretending not to listen were now openly staring. He saw a mixture of pity, discomfort, and a few flashes of what looked like quiet agreement on their faces. The silence was a judgment in itself. Todd smirked a quick, fleeting expression of victory. He had backed up his boss and put the uppity passenger in his place. Marcus's entire being screamed at him to unleash the fury coiling in his gut, to stand up and decimate her with a verbal barrage, to pull out his phone and show her the Thorne Capital portfolio, to explain that he could buy this entire rust bucket of a plane with the money he kept in his checking account. But he didn't. He looked at Lorraine's smug, expectant face, waiting for him to argue, to make a scene, to prove her right. He looked at Todd's weak chin and follower's eyes. He looked at the averted gazes of the other passengers. And he made a different calculation. A public confrontation would give them power. It would become his word against theirs, a messy he said, she said, that would end with a half-hearted apology from a corporate drone in a month's time. It would be a temporary, unsatisfying victory. He wanted more. He wanted something permanent, something structural. He simply nodded slowly, his eyes holding Lorraine's. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. His face was a mask of placid control. "Thank you for your concern," he said, his voice chillingly neutral. "I'll be sure to remember your hospitality." He then deliberately turned away from them, picked up his headphones, placed them over his ears, and stared out the window at the ground crew scurrying below. The signal was unmistakable. The conversation was over. Lorraine was left standing there momentarily flustered. She had expected a fight, not this cold dismissal. She had wanted to be the enforcer of standards, but instead she just felt irrelevant. With a huff, she turned and marched back to the galley, Todd trailing in her wake like a pilot fish. For the next 8 hours, Marcus didn't sleep. He didn't watch a movie. He didn't touch the gourmet meal they served. He just sat the thrum of the Rolls-Royce engines, a monotonous backdrop to the storm raging inside him. He replayed the scene, the words, the looks on their faces. The anger wasn't fading. It was refining itself, cooling from a hot, explosive rage into something harder, sharper, and infinitely more dangerous purpose. "This cabin isn't for people like you." She was right, he thought, as the first light of dawn began to streak the sky over the Irish Sea. This cabin, this airline, this culture of casual bigotry and entitled mediocrity wasn't for him. He was for something better. And as the plane began its final descent into Heathrow, Marcus Thorne wasn't just thinking about closing his business deal anymore. He was drafting a blueprint for a new project. It wasn't about revenge in the traditional sense. It was about acquisition. It was about control. It was about becoming the one person who could look Lorraine Vogel in the eye and say with the full weight of the entire corporation behind him, "You're right. This cabin isn't for people like me. Because I'm not just a passenger. I'm the owner. And I'm here to change the rules." The London meeting was a formality, the culmination of 2 years of relentless work. The ink was barely dry on the $8 billion acquisition contract when Marcus was already on a private jet back to New York, the humiliation on the commercial flight having convinced him to never again place his peace of mind in the hands of Global Air Alliance, or at least not the current version of it. He didn't go home. He didn't celebrate. He went straight to the 60th floor of a skyscraper in Midtown Manhattan, the headquarters of Thorne Capital. The office was a temple of minimalist power, all glass, steel, and sweeping views of the city that never slept. His team, accustomed to his nocturnal hours, was already there assembled in the main boardroom. There was Amelia Vance, his chief legal counsel, a woman whose mind was as sharp as the tailored suits she wore. There was Ben Carter, his head of acquisitions, a rumpled genius who saw numbers the way a composer sees notes, and there was Maria Flores, his operations chief, who could turn the most audacious strategy into a step-by-step logistical reality. They thought the meeting was to debrief the London deal. They were wrong. Marcus stood at the head of the vast marble table, the city lights twinkling behind him like a conquered galaxy. He didn't sit. "We've just added a significant asset to our portfolio," he began, his voice calm and measured. "Our liquidity is at an all-time high. I want to deploy it. Immediately." Ben Carter leaned forward, his eyes lighting up. "Another aerospace tech firm. There's a promising one in Seattle working on sustainable fuels." "No." Marcus cut him off. "Something different. I want to buy an airline." A confused silence fell over the room. Thorne Capital specialized in technology infrastructure and undervalued industrial assets. They didn't do consumer-facing service industries. Airlines were notoriously difficult. High overhead, thin margins, union battles, and immense brand vulnerability. Amelia was the first to speak her legal mind, immediately cataloguing the obstacles. Marcus, the capital required would be immense. The regulatory hurdles from the FAA and DOT are a nightmare. Which airline are you even thinking about? Marcus turned to the smart screen that covered one entire wall. He tapped his tablet, and the logo of Global Air Alliance, a generic blue and silver globe, filled the screen. This one, he said. Ben Carter almost choked on his coffee. GAA Marcus. They're a dinosaur. Their fleet is aging. Their customer satisfaction scores are in the toilet, and their stock has been stagnant for 5 years. They're bloated with legacy costs and a toxic corporate culture. It's a bad investment. I'm aware of their balance sheet. Ben Marcus replied, his voice dangerously quiet. I'm also aware of their culture. I experienced it firsthand on my flight to London yesterday. He then recounted the story. He told it without emotion, like an analyst presenting a case study. He detailed the gate agent's suspicion, the purser's condescending tone, the junior attendant's smirk, and the final galling insult. He didn't speak of his anger or humiliation. He spoke of it as a systemic failure, a brand liability, a cancer at the heart of the company. Lorraine Vogel and Todd something or other are not the disease, he concluded, looking each of them in the eye. They are symptoms. The disease is a culture of complacency, of entitlement, and of prejudice that has been allowed to fester from the top down. The CEO, Richard Sterling, is a relic who cares more about his golf handicap than his net promoter score. The board is asleep at the wheel. The company is rotting from the inside out. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Ben, you see a bad investment. I see an undervalued asset with a deeply tarnished brand that can be acquired, stripped down, and rebuilt from the ground up. We won't just be buying planes and routes. We will be buying the opportunity to create a new corporate culture, one founded on a principle so basic, it's astonishing it's been forgotten. Respect. Amelia's sharp, legal mind was already shifting from seeing obstacles to seeing pathways. A hostile takeover would be protracted and ugly. Sterling and his board would fight us tooth and nail. We're not going hostile, Marcus said. Not yet. We're going to be surgical. Ben, I want a full analysis of their major institutional shareholders. Find the disgruntled ones. Find the pension funds tired of seeing no returns. I want to start buying up blocks of shares. Quietly at first through shell corporations. We don't want to trigger an SEC filing until we're ready. Maria, I want you to start drafting a plan for a complete overhaul of in-flight services, from training to uniforms to customer complaint resolution. I want a 100-day plan ready to execute. The energy in the room had transformed. The initial confusion was replaced by a familiar high-stakes thrill. This was what they did best: identify a broken system and rebuild it to their specifications. For the next 3 weeks, Thorne Capital became a war room. Ben and his team of analysts worked around the clock, mapping the complex web of GAA's ownership. They found what they were looking for: several large activist hedge funds and state retirement funds that were deeply unhappy with Richard Sterling's leadership, but lacked the critical mass to force a change. Marcus began making calls. He didn't talk about prejudice or bad service. He spoke their language: shareholder value, untapped revenue streams, and long-term growth. He presented a vision of a revitalized GAA, a premium airline for the 21st century, lean, efficient, and with a brand so strong it could command higher ticket prices. He was offering them a way out of a bad investment and a path to significant profit. One by one, they agreed to sell their stakes to Thorne Capital. The purchases were made through a labyrinth of subsidiaries, keeping the true buyer hidden. The price of GAA stock began to creep up, but not enough to cause major alarm. The GAA board noted the activity, but attributed it to market speculation. The tipping point came when Marcus secured a massive block of shares from a Swiss investment bank that had been looking to unload its position for months. Combined with the other purchases, Thorne Capital now controlled 28% of Global Air Alliance. They were the largest single shareholder. The time for stealth was over. The time for shock and awe had begun. Amelia drafted the press release and the mandatory SEC filing. At 8:00 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, the news hit the wire. It exploded across the financial world. Thorne Capital acquires 28% stake in Global Air Alliance, Marcus Thorne, to seek board seat. At the GAA headquarters in Atlanta, the news landed like a bomb. CEO Richard Sterling, a portly man with a penchant for pinstripe suits, was in a meeting about updating the wine selection for the first-class cabin when his assistant burst in, her face pale. Sterling had heard of Marcus Thorne, of course. He knew him as a ruthless, brilliant predator in the tech world. He had never imagined Thorne would turn his gaze toward the grimy, unglamorous world of commercial aviation. His first reaction was disbelief. His second was rage. His phone began ringing off the hook. Board members, investors, journalists, everyone wanted to know what was happening. Sterling tried to project an aura of calm control, issuing a public statement that GAA welcomes all new investors and looks forward to a constructive dialogue. In private, he was in a panic. He knew this wasn't a passive investment. Men like Marcus Thorne didn't buy a quarter of a company to sit quietly in the corner. The first official communication from Thorne Capital arrived an hour later. It was a simple, legally precise letter, formally requesting a special meeting of the board of directors. The agenda item was singular, a presentation by Mr. Marcus Thorne on the future strategic direction of the company and his nomination to the board of directors. Sterling knew he couldn't refuse. With 28% of the voting shares, Thorne could force the meeting anyway. He was already outmaneuvered. As Marcus stood in his office looking down at the city, his phone buzzed. It was a news alert with a photo of a flustered-looking Richard Sterling. The headline read, "GAA in turmoil as activist investor Marcus Thorne takes control." Marcus allowed himself a small, cold smile. Control wasn't the right word. Not yet. This was just the opening move. He hadn't come for a board seat. He had come for the entire kingdom. And the people who had wronged him, the small-minded gatekeepers of mediocrity like Lorraine and Todd, had no idea that the architect of their company's radical transformation was the same man they had dismissed as someone who didn't belong. He was about to redesign the entire house, and they were still just rearranging the furniture. The Global Air Alliance boardroom was designed to intimidate. It was a cavernous space, paneled in dark, somber mahogany, dominated by a monolithic table that could comfortably seat 30. A portrait of the airline's founder, a stern-faced man from a bygone era, loomed over the proceedings. It was a room that reeked of old money, old ideas, and an unshakable belief in its own importance. It was the perfect stage for the drama that was about to unfold. Richard Sterling sat at the head of the table, flanked by his coterie of long-time board members, a collection of grey-haired men, and one woman who had been in their positions for so long. They viewed the airline less as a dynamic business and more as a private club. They had faced challenges before: fuel crisis, union strikes, recessions. But they had never faced a threat like Marcus Thorne. They viewed him as a barbarian at the gates, a Wall Street shark who didn't understand the soul of their airline. Marcus arrived precisely on time, not a minute early or late. He wasn't flanked by an entourage, only by Amelia Vance, his legal counsel, who carried a single slim leather portfolio. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored dark navy suit, a stark contrast to the unassuming tracksuit he had worn on his fateful flight. His presence instantly shifted the room's center of gravity. He wasn't asking for a seat at their table. He was acting like he already owned it. He exuded an aura of calm, predatory stillness. He nodded politely to the board, his eyes making brief but firm contact with each member before taking his designated seat opposite Sterling. Sterling cleared his throat, adjusting his tie. "Mr. Thorne, welcome. We were surprised by your sudden interest in our company." Surprised implies you weren't paying attention to the dissatisfaction of your largest shareholders. Mr. Sterling Marcus replied, his voice smooth as silk, but with an edge of steel. "My interest isn't sudden. It's the result of extensive analysis." An elderly board member, a retired banker named George, harumphed. "Your analysis is in tech and finance. Aviation is a different beast. It's a business of people, not just numbers." "I agree," George Marcus said, using the man's first name with an easy familiarity that unsettled him. "And your people are a liability. Your customer satisfaction is 17th in the domestic market. Your employee morale is at a 10-year low. Your brand is perceived as dated and indifferent. These aren't just people problems. These are numbers problems. They are shareholder problems." He gestured to Amelia, who placed a thin report in front of each board member. "This is a preliminary report drafted by my team." Marcus continued. "It details systemic failures in your operational pipeline, specifically in customer-facing roles. It highlights a culture that is not just inefficient, but actively hostile to a significant portion of your potential customer base." Sterling flipped through the report, his face growing redder with each page. "This is outrageous. We have one of the most comprehensive training programs in the industry. Our flight crews are award-winning. Your crews win awards from industry magazines, Richard." "They lose the loyalty of passengers," Marcus countered. "You're measuring the wrong metrics. You measure on-time departures, but you don't measure passenger dignity. You measure baggage handling efficiency, but you don't measure the long-term cost of a single negative viral incident." He let that hang in the air. He was baiting the hook, talking in a corporate language they understood all while masking his deeply personal motivation. He hadn't mentioned his flight. To do so now would be to show his hand, to make it seem like a personal vendetta. This had to be framed as a pure, cold business strategy. "I'm not here to criticize the past," he said, shifting his tone to one of constructive partnership. "I'm here to propose a profitable future. GAA has good bones, strong roots, a recognized name, but it's a mansion that has fallen into disrepair. It needs to be renovated from the foundation up." He stood up and walked to the smart screen at the end of the room, the same screen where he had displayed the GAA logo in his own office. With a tap on his tablet, a new presentation appeared. It was titled Project Ascent, a new vision for Global Air Alliance. For the next hour, he held them captive. He didn't just present numbers, he painted a picture. He spoke of a new class of service that would leapfrog the competition. He showed mock-ups of redesigned cabins, sleek and modern. He detailed a technology-first approach with a seamless app that handled everything from booking to baggage tracking. But the core of his presentation was about culture. The most valuable asset an airline has is not its planes, it's its reputation. And reputation is built on one thing: consistency. Every passenger from the back of economy to the front of first class must have a consistently respectful and positive experience. That is our new North Star. He outlined the creation of a new independent oversight committee. I'm proposing the formation of a customer experience and brand assurance committee. It will report directly to the board, not to the CEO's office. Its mandate will be to conduct a top-to-bottom audit of all customer-facing protocols and training with full authority to recommend and implement systemic changes. Sterling saw the trap immediately. An independent committee reporting to the board was a direct challenge to his authority. It would create a parallel power structure within his own company. That's unconventional, Sterling stammered. Our existing operational hierarchy is perfectly capable of handling such reviews. Your existing hierarchy created the problems we're discussing. Marcus retorted, his voice hardening again. It has proven it is incapable. This is not a negotiation, Richard. This is the condition upon which Thorne Capital will continue to be a cooperative shareholder. And as I will be chairing this new committee, I will of course require a seat on this board to do so effectively. Checkmate. He had tied his own board appointment to an initiative that no one could publicly oppose. How could they vote against a committee dedicated to improving customer experience? To do so would be to admit they didn't care about their own customers, a fatal admission for a publicly traded company. He had cornered them. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. They were old guard corporate warriors, but they recognized they were being outplayed by a master strategist. Marcus wasn't a barbarian. He was a revolutionary, and he was using their own rules against them. George, the old banker, sighed in resignation. I don't like his methods, but I can't argue with his logic. Our stock is up 12% since his name got attached to us. The markets believe in him. One by one, the other board members reluctantly nodded their assent. They were capitalists after all, and Marcus Thorne was promising them a return on their investment. Sterling was a defeated man. He knew he had lost control. He forced a tight, artificial smile. Very well. The board welcomes Mr. Thorne. We will of course cooperate fully with the new committee. Marcus gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Excellent. The committee's first act will be to review all high-level customer complaints from the past 12 months. I'd like the full unredacted files on my desk by Monday. And I'll want to be personally involved in interviewing the employees named in the most egregious cases. He looked directly at Sterling, but in his mind's eye, he saw the smug face of Lorraine Vogel. The trap had been set and baited. The first phase of his plan was complete. He was inside the castle walls. Now it was time to find the symptoms of the disease he had described and cut them out. The newly formed Customer Experience and Brand Assurance Committee was given a sterile, anonymous office suite on the 3rd floor of the GAA corporate headquarters, far from the mahogany-paneled grandeur of the boardroom. This was by Marcus's design. He didn't want the proceedings to feel like an executive meeting. He wanted them to feel like an inquest. The room designated 3B had grey walls, fluorescent lighting, and a single table. It felt less like a place for corporate synergy and more like a place where uncomfortable truths were brought to light. For 2 weeks, Marcus and a small hand-picked team of analysts from Thorne Capital sifted through mountains of data customer complaints, employee disciplinary records, and internal performance reviews. A pattern quickly emerged. A small number of employees were responsible for a disproportionately large number of negative reports. They were often the ones praised by their direct supervisors for being firm or maintaining standards code, for being inflexible and confrontational. The names Cynthia Lorraine and Todd appeared with alarming frequency attached to complaints that were almost always dismissed by mid-level management as passenger misunderstanding. Marcus instructed the HR department to schedule individual review sessions for a list of employees. The stated purpose was bland and corporate, a consultation as part of the Project Ascent initiative to improve service protocols. The employees were told they would be meeting with a new executive from the committee. His name was not provided. Cynthia, the gate agent, was first. She walked into room 3B with a defensive posture, her arms crossed over her chest. She saw Marcus dressed in a simple open-collared shirt and Amelia Vance, who took notes on a laptop. She showed no sign of recognition. To her, Marcus was just another corporate suit. Cynthia. "Thank you for coming in." Marcus began, his tone neutral. "We're reviewing an incident that occurred at JFK Gate 7A about a month ago. A report regarding a first-class passenger." Cynthia's expression soured. "Oh, that one. I remember. The man in the tracksuit. He was being difficult from the start. Had an attitude. I was just following protocol. Our records show you requested his ID, but not the passenger before him," Amelia noted, without looking up from her screen. "I use my discretion," Cynthia snapped. "He didn't. Looked like our typical first-class clientele. I was protecting the integrity of the cabin. That's my job. Is it your job to make assumptions based on a passenger's clothing?" Marcus asked calmly. "It's my job to spot irregularities." He was an irregularity, she insisted, her voice full of self-righteous conviction. She was unrepentant, convinced of her own correctness. She was, in Marcus's eyes, a lost cause. "Thank you, Cynthia. That will be all for now," Marcus said, dismissing her. Todd, the junior flight attendant, was next. He was visibly nervous, constantly fidgeting with his tie. He sat perched on the edge of his chair, ready to bolt. "Todd, we're here to discuss the same flight," Marcus began. Todd immediately went on the defensive, but his strategy was different from Cynthia's. He tried to shift blame. "Look, I was just backing up my purser. Lorraine, she runs the cabin. My job is to support her. She said the guy looked suspicious. So..." "Did you think he looked suspicious?" Amelia interjected. "Well, he didn't really fit the profile," Todd stammered. "Lorraine has been flying for 20 years. She has a sense for these things. I trust her judgment." "So your judgment is secondary to hers?" Marcus asked. "In the cabin, yes. She's the boss," Todd said, seeing a potential way out. He was painting himself as a loyal soldier just following orders. It was a cowardly but predictable defense. He showed no personal conviction, only a desire to save his own skin. "What if her judgment is flawed?" Marcus pressed. Todd shrugged, a helpless gesture. "That's not for me to say. I just do what I'm told." "I see," Marcus said, his voice cold. He had seen enough. Todd was a weather vane pointing in whichever direction the strongest wind blew. There was no moral compass to appeal to. Finally, it was Lorraine's turn. She entered room 3B with an air of supreme confidence. She saw Marcus and offered him a brilliant professional smile. Of all of them, she was the most dangerous. Her prejudice was wrapped in a thick, protective layer of corporate procedure and self-delusion. Like the others, she had no idea who she was talking to. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice the same saccharine weapon she had used in the cabin. "How can I help the committee?" We're reviewing your handling of a passenger in seat 1A on flight 1-12 to Heathrow. Marcus started. Lorraine nodded, her expression one of serious concern. Ah, yes. The passenger in the inappropriate attire. A very difficult situation. I handled it with the utmost discretion to avoid upsetting the other guests. Could you describe what made the situation difficult? Amelia asked. Well, his presence was disruptive to the carefully cultivated atmosphere of the first-class cabin, Lorraine explained as if lecturing students. Our premium passengers pay a great deal for an experience of luxury and exclusivity. A man dressed frankly like he was going to the gym cheapens that experience. It's my duty to be the gatekeeper of that standard. The word gatekeeper struck Marcus. That's exactly what she was. And what did you say to the passenger? Marcus asked, his heart beginning to beat a little faster. Lorraine recounted her version of the events, polishing them to a high shine. She claimed she had gently and politely reminded him of the aspirational standards of the cabin. Did you at any point, Marcus said, his voice dropping slightly, say the words, "This cabin isn't really for people like you"? Lorraine's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but she recovered instantly. I may have said something to that effect, yes. It was a delicate way of communicating that our cabin has a certain clientele, a certain decorum. He was clearly not part of that group. She had done it. She had walked right into the center of the trap and sat down utterly convinced of her own righteousness. She had admitted everything, framing her prejudice as a corporate virtue. Marcus sat back in his chair. The moment had arrived. He let the silence stretch out, filling the sterile room with a palpable tension. Lorraine's confident expression began to waver, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. She looked from Marcus's impassive face to Amelia's grim one. You're right, Marcus said softly. He was clearly not part of that group. He slid his personal smartphone across the table. He pressed play. A crystal-clear audio recording filled the room. It was the entire exchange from the plane. Cynthia's suspicious questioning, Lorraine's cloying voice, Todd's sniveling echo, and then the fatal words, sharp and damning in the quiet room. This cabin isn't really for people like you. Lorraine's face went white. The blood drained from it, leaving a pasty, slack-jawed mask of horror. Her eyes darted from the phone back to Marcus. For the first time, she was truly seeing him, not the tracksuit, but the man. The immaculately tailored shirt. The expensive watch on his wrist. The look of absolute glacial control in his eyes. The recognition dawned, followed by a tidal wave of pure, unadulterated panic. That passenger, Marcus said, his voice now devoid of any warmth, a shard of ice. The man in the tracksuit you judged, humiliated and dismissed, the one who didn't belong in your cabin. He leaned forward, holding her terrified gaze. That was me. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a career, a life and a world view imploding all at once. Lorraine Vogel, the self-appointed gatekeeper of standards, was staring into the face of the man who now owned the gate, the house, and the key. In the cold, fluorescent glare of room 3B, the reckoning had arrived. The sound of Marcus's voice saying, "That was me," shattered the manufactured reality Lorraine Vogel had lived in. Her composure, her professional veneer, her 2 decades of seniority. It all disintegrated in an instant. A strangled gasp escaped her lips, a sound of pure disbelief and terror. Her hands flew to her mouth as she stared at Marcus. Her mind frantically trying to connect the powerful executive in front of her with the quiet man she had so easily dismissed. The 2 images wouldn't merge. It was impossible. But the cold, hard certainty in his eyes told her it was true. Amelia Vance stopped typing and simply watched, her expression unreadable. Lorraine began to babble, the words tumbling out in a panicked, incoherent stream. "No, I didn't realize it. It can't be. I would never, if I had known who you were." Marcus held up a hand, and the torrent of excuses stopped abruptly. "That's the point, Lorraine," he said, his voice cutting through her panic. "It should not matter who I was. A passenger is a passenger. Their dignity is not dependent on their net worth or their job title." Just then the door to room 3B opened. Richard Sterling, the CEO, bustled in his face, a mask of forced joviality. He had been lurking nearby, anxious about the committee's interviews. "Everything going smoothly here?" he began, then stopped short, sensing the funereal atmosphere in the room. He saw Lorraine's ashen face and Marcus's thunderous expression. "Richard, perfect timing," Marcus said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Your purser was just explaining her philosophy on customer service." Sterling's eyes darted between them, a dawning horror on his face as he began to piece together what had happened. He had read the initial complaint file, the anonymous one, about the man in the tracksuit. He had dismissed it as another disgruntled passenger. He now realized the catastrophic miscalculation he had made. The disgruntled passenger was the man who now held the fate of his company and his own job in his hands. "Lorraine," Sterling barked, turning on her. "What did you do?" It was a desperate attempt to distance himself, to cast her as a lone actor. "She did what your corporate culture trained her to do." "Richard," Marcus interjected coolly, "she enforced an unwritten code of exclusion that you as CEO allowed to flourish. This isn't about one flight attendant. This is about the failure of your leadership." Sterling paled. He saw his career, his golden parachute, his legacy all evaporating before his eyes. "Mr. Thorne, Marcus, I assure you this will be dealt with immediately. Lorraine Todd, the gate agent there, fired. Effective immediately. We will issue a full apology." Marcus laughed, a short, sharp, mirthless sound that made everyone flinch. "Fired. You think this is about firing a few people? You still don't get it, do you?" he said, standing up and beginning to pace the small room. "Firing them is easy. It's a press release. It's a way for you to wash your hands of the problem and pretend it's solved. But the disease remains. Firing them is an event. I'm interested in a process, a permanent cultural exorcism." He stopped and turned to the shell-shocked Lorraine. Her fate was the centerpiece of his new strategy. "You're not fired, Lorraine," he said. Her head snapped up, a flicker of insane hope in her eyes. "You are being placed on indefinite unpaid suspension. Your return to this company in any capacity is contingent on your successful completion of a new mandatory training program, a program that I will personally design and oversee." The flicker of hope died. She understood. This was not a reprieve. It was a life sentence. Her career, her pride, her very identity as a senior purser was now in the hands of the man she had humiliated. It was a punishment far more exquisite and devastating than being fired. He then turned his attention to an imaginary Todd. Todd will be given a choice. He can resign immediately, or he can be the very first participant in the pilot program for this new training. A chance to unlearn his judgment and see if he is capable of redemption. His performance will be closely monitored. Finally, he addressed Cynthia. And Cynthia, the gatekeeper at JFK, will be reassigned. Effective Monday, she will be the new baggage handling supervisor at our station in Anchorage, Alaska, for the midnight shift. Let's see how she handles irregularities in the cargo hold. Richard Sterling stood there, utterly defeated. This wasn't just a personnel change. It was a coup. Marcus was dictating operational and HR decisions from a committee room. He was demonstrating in front of a subordinate and a rival CEO that he was the one with the real power. The fallout was swift and brutal. The story of what happened in Room 3B ripped through the corporate headquarters. It was a message, and it was received loud and clear: the old ways were over. Todd, when presented with his options, panicked. The idea of being the guinea pig in a high-pressure re-education program, personally overseen by Thorne, terrified him. He saw it not as a chance for redemption, but as a stage for his inevitable failure. He resigned the next day, citing personal reasons, and vanished from the company, a footnote in a much larger story. His cowardice had been his defining trait to the very end. Cynthia, upon receiving her transfer orders, threw a legendary tantrum in the HR office, screaming about lawsuits and unfair labor practices. Amelia Vance calmly presented her with a thick file detailing every formal complaint made against her in the past 5 years, along with a generous severance package she could take if she chose to resign instead. Faced with the prospect of fighting a legal battle against the unlimited resources of Thorne Capital or spending her winter sorting frozen suitcases in the Alaskan darkness, she took the money and left her career in aviation over. Lorraine, however, was trapped. Her pride and her financial situation wouldn't let her quit. She had a mortgage, a certain lifestyle to maintain. She clung to the sliver of a chance that she could endure this training, get her job back, and somehow salvage her life. She accepted the terms of her suspension. The final piece of the old guard fell 2 weeks later. At a press conference, Richard Sterling announced his early retirement to spend more time with his family. The board, now firmly under Marcus's influence, had forced him out. The next day, Marcus Thorne was unanimously voted in as the new chairman of the board of Global Air Alliance. He had done it. He hadn't just gotten an apology. He had taken the crown. But the work wasn't over. Now he had to rebuild the kingdom. His first act as chairman was to officially launch the Thorne Initiative for Inclusive Service, the very training program that held Lorraine Vogel's fate in its hands. The architect was now the king, and construction was about to begin. 6 months later, the changes at Global Air Alliance were palpable. They were visible in the new, elegant charcoal and silver uniforms that had replaced the dated blue polyester. They were audible in the new boarding announcements, which spoke of welcoming all our guests. They were tangible in the redesigned cabins which were being rolled out across the fleet. But the most profound change was happening in a place the public never saw, a state-of-the-art training facility near the Atlanta airport, the home of the Thorne Initiative. The initiative was Marcus's magnum opus. It was less a training program and more a complete psychological and philosophical re-engineering of what it meant to be a service professional. Trainees, both new hires and veteran employees, went through rigorous situational ethics workshops, cultural sensitivity labs run by university sociologists, and immersive virtual reality scenarios that put them in the shoes of passengers from every conceivable background. They were taught de-escalation techniques by FBI hostage negotiators and communication skills by theater professors. The core principle drilled into them every single day was simple: see the person, not the passenger. Marcus Thorne was not an absentee chairman. He spent at least 1 day a week at the facility, often observing the classes from a two-way mirrored gallery. He wanted to see his vision taking root, and it was from that gallery that he watched her. Lorraine Vogel was a ghost of her former self. The proud, imperious purser was gone, replaced by a weary, humbled woman in the standard grey trainee sweatsuit, the same colour as the one Marcus had worn. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, not the elaborate coif she once favoured. She was stripped of her rank, her seniority, her identity. She was just another trainee, and by all accounts a struggling one. She was in a VR simulation facing a scenario Marcus had personally designed. She was confronted by a passenger who didn't speak English, a frantic mother trying to understand if her child's special meal had been loaded onto the plane. The old Lorraine would have dismissed her with a wave of her hand, deeming her unable to communicate. The new Lorraine hesitated. The trainer's voices echoed in her head. Empathy. Patience. Find another way to connect. She took a breath, used a translation app on her company-issued tablet, and slowly, painstakingly managed to reassure the virtual mother. She passed the simulation, but with the lowest possible score. There was no triumph in her posture, only exhaustion. Later that day, she was in a group session reviewing her performance. The instructor, a bright young woman named Maya, who was half Lorraine's age, was gentle but firm. "Lorraine, you resolved the issue. That's good," Maya said. "But your initial response was hesitation and frustration. We saw your biometrics spike. You still see the problem first, not the person." "What's holding you back?" Lorraine was silent, staring at the floor. For months, she had been a sullen, resentful participant, doing the bare minimum to get by. But the constant, relentless pressure of the initiative was starting to erode her defenses, grinding away at the bedrock of her long-held prejudices. I don't know." She finally mumbled the words, costing her a visible effort. "For 20 years, my job was about enforcing rules, being in charge. Now, I don't know what my job is anymore." "Your job is to serve," Maya said softly. "And you can't serve people if you are secretly judging them." From the gallery, Marcus watched a complex expression on his face. He felt no pleasure in her humiliation. His anger had long since cooled, replaced by a profound, almost weary sense of responsibility. He had torn down this woman's world, and now he was tasked with showing her how to build a new one. It was a karma that was more demanding than simple revenge. He left the gallery and walked down to the main floor. As the training session broke up, he positioned himself by the exit. The trainees filed out, buzzing with conversation, their faces full of energy. Lorraine trailed behind them, isolated and alone. She looked up and saw him. Her entire body tensed. It was the first time they had been in the same room since the fateful meeting in 3B. She stopped, unsure whether to run to apologize or to simply collapse. Marcus walked slowly toward her. He stopped a few feet away. "Lorraine," he said, his voice quiet and even. "Mr. Thorne," she whispered, her eyes on the floor. "Chairman." "I saw your simulation today," he said. "You were struggling, but you didn't give up. You found a solution." She risked a glance at his face, searching for mockery, for gloating. There was none. There was only a calm, unreadable intensity. "This program, this company, it's not about punishment." He continued, as much for himself as for her. "It's about the belief that people can be better, that we can learn, that we can change. The old GAA was built on exclusion. The new one will be built on empathy. It's a harder path. It requires more of us." He looked at her, the woman who had caused him such profound humiliation, and he saw not an enemy, but the ultimate test of his own philosophy. If his initiative could reform her, it could reform anyone. "Your future here isn't up to me anymore, Lorraine," he said. "It's up to you. The choice is yours. Become a part of the new ascent or remain a relic of the fall." He held her gaze for a moment longer, then turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone in the cavernous hall. Lorraine watched him go, the titan who had remade the world around her. And for the first time in 6 agonizing months, the resentment in her heart gave way to something else. It was a terrifying, fragile, and utterly unfamiliar feeling. It was the first painful flicker of understanding. Her journey wasn't over. In a way, it had just begun. That is the incredible story of Marcus Thorne, a man who responded to injustice not with a lawsuit, but with a revolution. He turned a moment of personal humiliation into a catalyst for sweeping systemic change. It's a powerful reminder that the biggest victories aren't about revenge. They're about rewriting the rules of the game entirely. What would you have done in his shoes? Have you ever faced a situation where you felt completely powerless, only to dream of turning the tables? Share your thoughts and your own stories in the comments below. We read every single one. If this story of epic karma resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs to see it, and make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss the next story we have in store for you. Thanks for watching.